Did it start? It is recorded. Okay. Are we ready? Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ashley Pierre-Louis, and I am a public involvement specialist from Howard Stein Hudson. And so,
I'm Sonam Katira. I'm a civil designer at Howard Stein Hudson.
and tonight we're here to talk about your Complete Streets Prioritization Plan that was submitted this spring. I will move to the next slide. So for our agenda tonight, we are going to introduce the Complete Streets Funding Program, just a bit of an overview. And then we'll review some of the public comments that we got. And then we'll go over the prioritization process and then the draft project list and then getting some of your feedback as well. Did I close the door?
Oh, gotcha. I'm a little early.
Okay. So what is a complete street? A complete street is one that provides safe and accessible options for all travel modes, walking, biking, transit, and vehicles for people of all ages and abilities. And improvements may be large scale, such as a corridor wide, or focus on the needs of a single mode at a single location. And these are some examples of some complete streets projects in Cohasset and in Hudson. And the benefits of a complete street include safety, accessibility, equity, health, economic benefits, and then for all users and abilities, so children, seniors, people with disabilities, and those without access to a car. So just a quick snapshot of the Complete Streets Funding Program. So there are 3 tiers for entry into the program, and there's planning assistance to support the plan up to $38,000 available to any community that is reimbursable. And then for Complete Streets construction, that's up to $400,000 annually that's reimbursable. Design is not an eligible expense. And up until now, or up until this point, about $75 million has been spent on projects across the state since the program has started. So tier 1 was training in the Complete Streets policy development, which is what the town had gone through. Tier 2 is where we had come in for the Complete Streets Prioritization Plan development. And tier 3 would be the next step after this, which would be a project approval and notice to proceed for construction for any projects that you decide to move forward with. You want to take it? Or am I doing it? Okay. And so some sources we use for the draft project list include public meeting comments, wiki map comments that people had submitted, priorities from the town, existing conditions analysis, and published reports that the town had. And that would include some of the regional plans as well. And so at the public meeting we came to, some of the things that we heard included safety concerns with conditions on Route 122 and Route 56, a desire for extended pedestrian connections to reach the center school from Suomi Street, a few places to bike and walk safely around town, having lack of connections to some of the green and open spaces. And then there were also speeding concerns along Marshall Street, Suomi Street, it says Marshall Street twice, and then Pleasant Street and Route 122. And this is just the wiki map, so just a screenshot. So you can see all of the little dots are people's comments. We received 259 comments on the wiki map while it was open. 138 were regarding pedestrian access, 104 were regarding driving and transit access, 15 were about bicycle access, and then 2 were about ADA concerns. So some of the concerns, the top concerns we had pulled from all of the comments were regarding pedestrian connections. So a lot of people have reported that many areas were for desired sidewalks for pedestrian use, including Suomi Street, Maple Street, and Route 122 on Pleasant Street. I will highlight that Route 122 is a state-owned road. So Complete Streets funding cannot be used for it. So no projects were developed for it. I just want to make sure everyone is aware of that. High speeds were also a concern. So transit and pedestrian comments identified a lot of speeding issues along the major streets, and then having that lack of bicycle and pedestrian facilities where everyone is kind of mixing, so it feels unsafe. And then the town center as well. Users of all modes reported having safety concerns and issues throughout the town center, including poor visibility and dangerous crossings.
So there were a couple of steps we took in the prioritization plan process. First, we compiled existing studies, plans, and projects in the area. We identified areas where conditions are deficient and there is a high utility and equity can be addressed. We gathered input from the community and town officials, and we worked with the town to identify a list of potential projects. We prioritized projects based on conditions, demand, equity, and stakeholder input. Some key points for this prioritization plan. The projects don't need to be constructed in order of priority. However, projects may only receive Tier 3 funding if they're included on the list. Projects must be fully designed or require little to no design to be funded, and the funds cannot be used for design. The funds must be used within a year of when funding is granted to the town, and the funds cannot be used on state-owned roads or bridges. There may be a permitting process to allow this in the future. So this is the list of criteria used to create a rank for each project. So the first is network connection. That is creating a path or a connection to points of interest. So for example, can a person travel from point A to point B comfortably and safely? Points of interest. And priority areas. They're areas of importance for the greater community, such as schools, senior centers, grocery stores, parks, and municipal facilities like the library, fire station, town hall, etc. Environmental justice. In Massachusetts, an environmental justice population is a neighborhood where one or more of the following criteria are true. One being the annual median household income is 65% or less of the statewide annual median household income. Number two, minorities make up 40% or more of the population. Three, 25% or more of households identify as speaking English less than very well, or 4, minorities make up 25% or more of the population, and the annual median household income of the municipality in which the neighborhood is located doesn't exceed 150% of the statewide annual median household income. And then a few more points, such as the number of pedestrian and bicycle crashes adjacent to the project, the level of infrastructure improvement through a project, the percentage of persons with disabilities, and stakeholder input. So this is a screenshot of the prioritization plan template with all of the criteria used to rank projects. So the project list has a total of 37 projects. There's a variety of projects such as pedestrian and ADA improvements, bicycle improvements, and traffic calming. You'll see some of the projects repeat across the next few slides because they address multiple modes of travel. Projects that address the needs of multiple modes are more competitive when applying for Tier 3 funding, and projects can always be updated in the future prior to Tier 3 funding as well. So a majority of the pedestrian and ADA projects focus on sidewalks along major connectors through the town like Maple Street, Suomi Street, and West Street. As a reminder, Route 122 is a state-owned road, so we did not develop any projects for it. And some of the projects have multiple phases due to the length of the road, and we measured each phase by 1,000-foot sections. This is the list of bicycle mobility projects. So one of the projects includes installing bicycle racks on 3 roads: Asney Bumpskit Road, Bell Arbor Drive, and Indian Hill Road. One of the projects includes installing shared lane markings on Davis Hill Road. One of the projects is constructing a shared use path along South Street, and the last is addressing traffic calming measures along Marshall Street. So bicycle projects focus on increasing bicycle access, safety, and infrastructure. And then for the traffic calming, we have 2 projects. The Richards Avenue Route 56 closure project will close the section of Richards Avenue from Highland Street to the church parking lot near Maple Street to general traffic and non-emergency vehicles. It'll reroute traffic and expand the town center space for pedestrians and bicyclists. We heard concerns about speeding, poor sight lines in the triangle, and poor traffic flow and congestion. A project like this will require traffic analysis, and a public process should be considered for Tier 3 funding in the future.
So some of the next steps for Complete Streets would be the Tier 3. So that would be project approval and notice to proceed. The municipality would identify the projects from its Complete Streets plan that they want to move forward with for funding. And then MassDOT would determine which projects would be funded. It is a competitive grant, so it will be with other towns across the state. And then the municipality and MassDOT would enter into a contract should they receive that funding. And your plan was submitted in April 2022. And that is the end of our presentation, so we are open for discussion. And I can go back to any slides if you want us to go back as well. Mhm.
And there I am. Oh, yes, Robin Tasca, keep on. I know that the plan was submitted in April. Do we have an idea? Have we heard back yet? Do we have an idea of when we may hear back on any of the prioritization?
The DPW director here in town. We did have to make some amendments to the prioritization plan. I'm still waiting to hear back from MassDOT in regards to whether that's been approved or not, or if there's further amendments that need to be made.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions, or would you like me to go back to any of the projects to discuss further?
Ashley, would you mind just discussing a little bit about what the top comments were coming in from the wiki maps?
Yeah, let me go back to that. So for the wiki map, we unfortunately, but also fortunately, had a lot of comments around Route 122. Um, Unfortunately, because you can't apply for grant funding through this program, but fortunately, so maybe in the future you could go back to the state and kind of ask again for any improvements to be made to Route 122. I know it was mentioned in our first meeting that you had been asking the state to do something for that. So this would be a nice way to be like our community is also concerned about this area. But a lot of the other comments that had come in were regarding Suomi Street and South Street, trying to get people and students over to the school safely, because that connection kind of ends once you get past the school. So creating a connection there. There was also mention of trucks going down. I believe was it South Street or Marshall Street, I think. Suomi Street. Okay, yes. So Suomi Street, which again, getting children to the school safely. So trying to find ways to kind of separate people from the road, and get them to their destinations better. We had talked about Maple Street as well being a major connector for the community to get to their destinations. So, yep. So Suomi Street and Maple Street and Route 122 were a majority of the comments that had come in. Speeding was a big thing that had come up too. A lot of the roads are, as you saw, they were in multiple phases because they're very long. Some are very windy, and you're sharing it with other users. And then there's poor sight lines and hills. It was a lovely drive though. But it's not the best driving situation all the time. So coming up with some of those traffic calming measures, whether that's speed feedback signage or like warning signs, just to let people or have people be more aware of the conditions that they're driving in. And then the town center had come up a lot, which unfortunately also overlaps with Route 122. But poor visibility had come up in like other parts of kind of like that triangle and those intersections over by the church being one where like Maple Street is, because it's just such wide turns. So hopefully in the future, other improvements could be made as well to address that situation. But speeding had also come up in that area. But also wanting to give pedestrians and bicyclists like more access to the area and let people use the town center better, which is where the idea of coming up with closing that little section between like the church parking lot and Highland Street had come up with, just to give people a little more like breathing room to expand and like be able to walk around. And that was like the bulk of the comments that had come in from the wiki map.
And just to discuss the town common a little bit further, you mentioned possibly closing off a portion of Richards Ave between the church parking lot and Highland Street. We also had discussed several other options as well. I know Mass DOT was a big part in that. Cost is obviously a factor. Would you mind just discussing a little bit further about what we talked about?
Yeah. Do you mean the concepts, right?
Yes.
Okay. So in 2019, a concept was developed to redesign that entire intersection. I might be able to pull it up if I stop sharing my screen for a second, and be able to show you guys. It was to actually let me do that. Give me
Quick question. I know that 122 is exempt from this whole process because it's a state-owned road. What about the fact when 122 and 56 overlap? Does 122 trump 56 in that capacity? Or can you say, well, because they're the same strip for a portion of time and somebody wants to do something on 56, we can do it? I didn't know if that's like a gray area because it's, two roads in one, if you will.
From my understanding, the state road supersedes the town maintained road. The state maintains that portion of 122 from Asnabunskett intersection to Richards Ave intersection where the two highways would overlap. So from my understanding, that we would not be allowed to use the funding for that portion.
It figures as much, but I just wanted to.
I can So it's really a matter of ownership. Who owns the right of way at that location? So, and that's what I think what you're speaking to. If
Yep.
they're maintaining it, they must own it.
Yep.
With regard to even if Mass DOT owns it, it can still be on your prioritization plan. And that's really how you kind of send the message to Mass DOT that you have priorities on their road. Because otherwise, what are you going to do in the future? You're going to pull up these public comments. I know in other towns that we've worked with, that's what we've done, where we've listed priorities, knowing that they wouldn't be eligible for a grant, but at least having it on the board so that when Mass DOT comes in the future and tries to do something, you show that the community wants something there. I can give you an example of that. But just for a brief introduction, my name's Steve Tyler. I manage our Howard Stein office, Worcester office. I've been managing that office for about 3 years, but prior to that, I was the DPW superintendent in the town of Spencer. In Spencer, I did our prioritization plan, and we had priorities on Route 9, both portions that the town owned and the portions that the state owned. And on the state portions, the key elements were on the westerly side of town from basically, we'll call it Water Street or near the fire station, to East Brookfield. That's all Mass DOT owned, but there are gaps in our sidewalk and we wanted them filled in because it goes to the commercial area, Big Y and so forth. So those were listed. And the benefit of that is in the future, there's actually a TIP project on the board now for that segment. And when this TIP project comes up, that's a pretty strong thing to be able to show the Mass DOT that this is a priority and we want it. And I'll say by comparison, the town of Leicester didn't have things on their main street. And if you notice that they went through and recently repaved Route 9 through Leicester, you didn't see any improvements to the sidewalks or the ramps or anything like that along that section of Route 9 in Leicester. And if they had some elements on there, then not that you would have got them, but at least you would have had that history to go with it. And the history does carry when you're talking about either state projects, TIP projects, and that type of stuff.
And so our request, like our suggestions for 122 are on, like we made sure that that was part of the plan, even though we know that it's not gonna happen, like nothing's gonna happen, but at least it's on record. Like we made sure that that information got carried over for Paxton, correct?
The answer is, I don't know if there is anything on 122 on your prioritization plan right now. You could place it on there for those reasons. And the answer is it doesn't mean it's not going to go anywhere. It just means it's not eligible for Tier 3 funding. It just means that you can't apply for Tier 3 funding and get it done, but you still desire that to happen to the road, and that's a good demarcation in history to make.
And
No,
Robin,
I
even though it's not on the prioritization plan, we still have the data that we collected through the wiki maps, through the people's comments when we had the previous meeting.
Okay,
So we have that data that we can transfer and give to the state
okay,
when we get to that point.
that's good.
So there is one project on Route 122 that it's under, like, it won't be eligible, but it is written in. It is for shared use path construction along Route 122. It would construct a 10-foot wide shared use path from the Paxton Rutland town line to the Worcester town line. It had been discussed that believe Worcester had already started building a shared use path. So trying to use that for leverage as, yes, can we continue this through Paxton? So that is one project that got brought in. So it would be about 5 miles of shared use path.
And for those folks at home that don't know what a shared use path is, would you mind explaining that a little bit, please?
Yeah, so a shared use path, you can kind of think about it as like, it would be like a very wide sidewalk, but it's not just for walking, it's also using for bicyclists. So it would have two-way direction, and bicyclists and pedestrians can use it as well, and it would be separated from the road. So it's a bit wider, but it's also safer because it's removing everyone from the cars. So yeah, did I explain it correctly? So no.
Yes, thank you.
I don't know if there's a technical term I missed, but I can pull up the concept.
That would be fantastic.
Okay, one moment. So this might be a little blurry. But this is the concept from 2019, redesigning the intersection. I would say the biggest highlights are that this triangle of the town center now becomes a one-way direction. So you'd be coming up Pleasant, following my mouse. It would be going up Pleasant and then going up this way, and then if you were going to come back around, you'd be turning down Richards that way. MassDOT was not a fan of this concept. They did have some issues with it, so we decided not to include that concept idea onto the plan again. So if other ideas come up in the future for the town, then other concepts would be developed. But
And Ashley, the thought process behind this is to try to make the common a larger greenscape and more user-friendly for the residents in town, correct?
yes, so it included more sidewalks. I can't tell in here, but I think there might have been some parking that was involved as well. Just to kind of make the space more friendly for everyone, bring more people downtown, down to like the common to be able to use it, and then be on their way to other points of interest and destinations nearby.
And it also separated Highland, so it had its own entry and exit onto 122.
Yes, I did miss that. So down here, yeah, Highland Street now has its own entrance, as Travis just said. So there's a bit more green space between those two areas as well.
And there's no way we could actually, like, and looking at this, just brainstorming, we couldn't actually eliminate that strip of Richards because then there's no access to the Catholic Church, which would be problematic. Yeah. That's very interesting though, because that enhances the green space and it draws people to the common, where this year alone, yourself and the Paxton Garden Club have worked collaboratively to enhance the spaces with public gardens. So.
Now, even though MassDOT did not approve this design, that's not saying that they wouldn't approve a design. They just didn't care for this particular design, correct?
Yes, so if other concepts come up in the future, obviously they would go to MassDOT for discussion. This is just one version that was developed that they were not a fan of. But should other concepts come up in the future, and they'd be open to discussion. Steve, do you recall any of the elements they didn't like about this concept?
I think they had concerns about access to the churches and making sure that was maintained, which this does, but then also I think some truck movements through there, that they had concerns with how they would operate. And just in general, there is hesitancy when dealing with a public space such as that because of the Article 97 effect and when it becomes a state project and the legal process that entails. I know that's something that they typically try to avoid, but it's not a mandatory requirement. But those are the comments that I recall.
There any other questions, comments, concerns? Well, I thank you folks very much for coming in and putting on the brief presentation this evening. I greatly appreciate it. We would ask that any residents that are watching this, if you have any comments, concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself via email or through the webpage. And we would love to get some feedback. So we will be putting this prioritization plan up on the website once it has been approved by MassDOT. I look forward to hearing from the residents. Thank you. Thank you, folks.